The greatest civilization of men in the history of Arda was not destroyed by a foreign army, or famine, or plague. It was brought down by a single, whispered lie that convinced them to declare war on God himself. Their arrogance was so profound it literally broke the world, an act of divine retribution that makes the destruction of the One Ring seem a localized tremor. This is the story of Númenor, the island kingdom gifted to the ancestors of Aragorn, and how their quest for immortality, fueled by the dark counsel of Sauron, led them to challenge the Valar and cause the very seas to rise up and swallow their pride, forever changing the shape of the world. At the end of the first age of the world, after the cataclysmic war of wrath that saw the Dark Lord Morgoth finally overthrown, the slate of history was wiped clean with fire and flood. The world was remade, and rewards were given to those who had stood for the light. The elves were granted passage back to the Undying Lands, a paradise in the uttermost west. But for the race of men who had fought and bled alongside them, the Edain, a different, unique reward was conceived. Out of the great sea, between Middle-earth and the shores of Valinor, the Valar, the angelic guardians of the world, raised a new land. It was shaped like a five-pointed star and was set apart, a bastion of peace and prosperity. They called it Elena, the land of the star, but it would become known in history by its high elven name, Númenor. To this island were led the surviving men of the three great houses of the Edain, and their leader was Elros, the son of Irindil. He was brother to Elrond of Rivendell, and like his brother, he was of half-elven lineage. But where Elrond chose the immortality of the elves, Elros chose the gift of men mortality, and became their first king, taking the name Tar Miniatur. And so began the glory of the Númenorians. The Valar blessed them with gifts beyond those of other men. Their lifespans were extended threefold, their bodies grew taller and stronger, and their minds became keen and wise, capable of perceiving the deep structures of the world. They became master mariners, shipwrights, and artisans without peer in the mortal lands. For thousands of years, they lived in an age of peace and enlightenment, ruled by a line of kings descended from the hero who had sailed to the heavens to beg for salvation. They sailed back to the shores of Middle-earth, not as conquerors, but as teachers. They taught the lesser men of the Dark Years agriculture, craftsmanship, and law, bringing light to a continent still recovering from the shadow of Morgoth. For a time, they were seen as gods, benevolent figures arriving from the sea in ships that shone like the sun. They were the Dunedain, the men of the West, and their power was absolute, yet wielded with wisdom. They had but one law, one prohibition laid upon them by the Valar. They were forbidden to sail so far west that the shores of their own island disappeared from the horizon. For to the west lay the Undying Lands, the blessed realm of Achamen, home to the Valar and the High Elves. It was a land where mortals could not endure. This ban was not a punishment, but a protection. For 2,000 years, this was enough. The kings of Númenor ruled in bliss. They would ascend the holy mountain of Meneltarma 3 times a year to honor Eru Ilúvatar, the one god. Ships of the elves would sail from their own island of Tol Eressëa, bearing gifts and knowledge, and the two kindreds shared a friendship born of ancient alliance. But the seed of discontent is slow to grow, and its roots run deep. How could a people so blessed, so wise, turn so completely from the light that had given them everything? The Númenorians began to resent the one thing they could not master: death. The gift of men, the release from the circles of the world, began to be seen not as a gift, but as a doom. They looked to the immortality of the elves and the Valar with envy. The ban, which had been a simple ordinance of geography, now felt like the wall of a prison, designed to keep them from the one secret they craved above all else: eternal life. This fear fractured their society. A shadow party emerged, known as the King's Men. They turned away from the ancient traditions, ceasing the reverence of the Valar, and speaking only in their own tongue, scorning the elven language that had been a mark of their high heritage. Opposing them were the faithful, the Elendili, who held true to the old ways and the friendship with the elves. They were a dwindling minority, persecuted for their loyalty to the powers that had made their people great. The kings of Númenor, once benevolent teachers, now became lords of wealth and power. They built fortresses on the coasts of Middle-earth and demanded tribute. Their ships, once symbols of hope, now became symbols of fear. Their fear of death had made them greedy for life, and that greed curdled into a lust for dominion over all they could see. This decline culminated in the reign of the last and most powerful king, Ar-Pharazôn. He was a proud and arrogant man who usurped the throne. When word reached him that in Middle-earth a new power was rising, he reacted with fury. Sauron, the former lieutenant of Morgoth, had re-emerged from the shadows and declared himself the king of men. For Ar-Pharazôn, this was an intolerable challenge to his authority. He would not suffer any other to claim that title. He did not send an emissary or a small force. Ar-Pharazôn gathered the greatest armament the world had ever seen and sailed for Middle-earth himself. The might of Númenor in those days was so overwhelming, its splendor so terrifying, that the very armies of Sauron deserted their master. They fled before the sight of the Dunedain fleet, unwilling to face the power of the men of the sea. Sauron's gambit had failed, or so it seemed. Realizing he could not win by force of arms, Sauron employed a far more dangerous weapon: deceit. He humbled himself before Ar-Pharazôn, offering fealty and worship. The proud king, his vanity sated, decided to take Sauron back to Númenor as a hostage, a living trophy of his ultimate victory over the so-called Lord of the Earth. It was the greatest mistake in the history of mankind. Sauron, the master of lies, was brought to the heart of the kingdom he could never have conquered from without. The wolf had been invited into the fold. Within a mere 3 years, Sauron went from a chained captive to the king's most trusted advisor. His knowledge was immense, his counsel cunning, and his flattery irresistible. He played upon Ar-Pharazôn's single greatest fear: death. He told the aging king that the Valar were not guardians, but jealous jailers. He whispered that the true source of power in the universe was not the distant and silent Eru, but the Lord of Darkness, Melkor, who could offer his worshippers what the Valar denied them. He promised them everlasting life. Under Sauron's influence, Ar-Pharazôn descended into utter depravity. He ordered the White Tree, the living symbol of friendship with the elves and the Valar, to be cut down and burned. In its place, he built a mighty temple. It was a silver dome 500 feet high, and at its summit, a great altar where a fire was ever burning. But this was no holy flame. In this temple to Melkor, Sauron initiated rites of darkness. He became the high priest of a new religion, founded on the worship of the void. The king's men flocked to this new faith, and the faithful were hunted down. They were accused of being traitors, and many were sacrificed upon the altar, offered to the darkness in the false hope of securing the king's immortality. Númenor, the land of gift, had become a realm of absolute terror, ruled by a shadow. And still, the king grew older. The specter of death loomed larger than ever. Sauron, seeing his puppet consumed by desperation, delivered his final, masterful lie. He told Ar-Pharazôn that the source of eternal life was not a gift to be earned, but a place to be conquered. He spoke of the undying lands, of Valinor itself. He claimed that whoever set foot upon that hallowed soil would become immortal. The Valar, he argued, were hoarding this power for themselves. To live forever, the king of men must take it from them. By force, the lie was swallowed whole. Pride and fear had blinded an entire nation. Ar-Pharazôn, in a final, insane act of defiance against his own mortality, commanded the building of the great armament. For 9 years, the forges of Númenor burned without ceasing. Forests were felled to build the hulls of 1,000 warships, each one a floating fortress armed for a war against heaven. The island grew dark with the smoke of industry, and the hearts of the people grew hard with a lust for a life they were never meant to have. The day of departure came. The fleet was assembled, a forest of masts and black sails that choked the western harbors. Ar-Pharazôn, clad in shimmering armor, boarded his flagship, the Alcarandas, and gave the order to sail. He was going to challenge the powers of the world, to demand immortality at the point of a sword. As the fleet left the shores of Númenor behind, a change came over the world. The skies darkened, and the sea grew strangely calm, as if holding its breath. From the west came the eagles of the lords of the west, flying in formations that resembled a sky-born army, a final warning. But the king, in his madness, was not deterred. He saw them as a challenge. Ar-Pharazôn, last king of Númenor, set sail to make war upon the very gods who had gifted his people the world. He had broken the ban of the Valar, and for a moment, nothing happened. The fleet passed into the light of the undying lands, a realm of such serene and piercing beauty that the hearts of the Númenorian soldiers were filled with a mixture of awe and covetous desire. The air was clean and sweet, the silence profound. Ar-Pharazôn, his pride swelling, landed upon the shores of Aman itself. He and his personal guard marched onto the green and silent land, planting his standard in the hallowed soil and claiming the entire continent for himself, in defiance of all law and reason. He had challenged the gods, and they had not answered. The silence was his victory. But as the king's foot touched the sacred ground, the world held its breath. The Valar, the guardians of the world, faced a choice they had never anticipated. They were forbidden from killing or compelling the children of Ilúvatar. To strike down Ar-Pharazôn's army would be to break the very laws they were sworn to uphold, and so Manwë, Lord of the Elder Days, called upon a power greater than their own. He laid down his guardianship of Arda and called upon the one creator, Eru Ilúvatar. But what about the architect of this entire affair? What was Sauron doing while his puppet king sailed to his doom? He had not joined the fleet. He remained in Númenor, and as he stood upon his temple of darkness, he laughed. Did Sauron ever believe Ar-Pharazôn could conquer the Undying Lands? Of course not. The invasion was never the point. The destruction of the Númenorian army was not the goal. It was merely the catalyst. Sauron's true target was not Ar-Pharazôn. It was the Valar themselves. He had engineered a situation so blasphemous, so impossible, that the Valar would be forced to act in a way that would forever change their relationship with the world. He gambled that they would be forced to call upon Eru, and that Eru would remove the Undying Lands from the physical spheres of the world, leaving Middle-earth entirely to him. He was sacrificing a king and a nation to remove the gods from the board, and Eru answered. In that moment, the one god reshaped the very nature of existence. A great chasm opened in the sea between the land of the Númenorians and the shores of the Deathless. The armies of Ar-Pharazôn, standing in triumph on the coast, saw the sky tear open and the land beneath them fall away. The mountains collapsed upon them, burying the proud king and all his warriors in a timeless tomb, where they are said to remain, trapped beneath the earth, until the Dagor Dagorath, the final battle at the end of time. The great armament, the most powerful fleet ever assembled, was dragged into the abyss. The world, which had once been flat, was bent and made round. The straight road to Valinor was removed from the sight of men forever, now accessible only to the elves, who were still permitted to sail the hidden path into the true west. For everyone else, to sail west was simply to sail around the world and return to your starting point. The divine was severed from the mortal, and then doom came for Númenor itself. The island of the star, the land of gift, was caught in the cataclysm. The foundations of the earth were broken, and the sea rose up in a single, mountainous wave. It crashed over the fields and cities, drowning the works of millennia in an instant. The silver temple of Sauron was the first to be swallowed by the black water, and in its destruction, Sauron's physical form was annihilated. His spirit, however, endured. Robbed of the fair form he had used to deceive so many, he fled back to Mordor as a wind of shadow and malice, a being of pure hatred, forever unable to again hide his evil nature. His greatest prize, the Ring of Power, was safe in the chambers of Barad-dûr, waiting for its master's return. In a single night of terror and ruin, Númenor, the greatest kingdom of men that ever was or will be, was wiped from the face of the earth. It slid beneath the waves, to be remembered only in legend as Atalante, the downfallen. But not all were lost. A small remnant, the faithful who had never bowed to Sauron, had seen the doom approaching. Their leader, Elendil the Tall, a descendant of the ancient kings, had been warned by his father to prepare. They had refused the king's summons, and had gathered their people and their most precious heirlooms onto 9 ships, anchored on the eastern coast. When the cataclysm struck, their ships were cast up upon the crest of the great wave, driven eastward by a furious storm. They carried with them a seedling of the White Tree, a last remnant of the light of Valinor. These were the survivors, the last blood of Númenor, bearing the memory of what was lost, and carrying the hope of what might yet be. They washed ashore in a world that was both new and old, a world bent and broken, forever changed by the wrath of the One. They were the exiles, lords in a strange land, their kingdom nothing but a memory drowned in the sorrow and the salt of the sea. But in their hearts, they carried the west. In the north, Elendil founded the kingdom of Arnor. In the south, his sons laid the foundations of Gondor, the stone kingdom that would stand against the shadow for centuries to come. They were a remnant, but they were the last echo of a glory that the world would never see again. The second age of the sun had ended in fire and water, and the third age was dawning in shadow and doubt. For the spirit of Sauron had not been idle. The shadow that fled the ruin of Númenor returned to his fortress, to the land of Mordor, where the fires of Mount Doom still burned. He had lost his fair form, but not his power, nor his malice. And he still possessed the masterwork of his craft, the one ring that held the dominion of Middle-earth within its golden band. He had paid a great price, but he had removed his greatest enemies from the board. The world of men was now his to conquer. The age of myth gave way to the age of twilight. The divine was gone, the elves were fading, and the long struggle for the freedom of Middle-earth now fell to the scattered and grieving sons of Númenor and their allies. A new war was coming. A last alliance of elves and men would be forged to confront the Dark Lord, a war that would define the fate of the coming age. The downfall of Númenor was not the end of the story. It was the end of the beginning. The great tales of the Third Age were about to be written in blood and steel, in courage and in sacrifice. The legacy of Atalante would echo down through the ages, a warning of the price of pride, and a testament to the enduring hope carried by the faithful. The chronicles of this broken world are vast and deep. The War of the Last Alliance, the forging of the realms in exile, the shadow of the ring that would darken the world for 3,000 years. All these stories are yet to be told. To witness the wars and wonders that followed, and to delve deeper into the lore of the Elder Days, subscribe to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles and never miss a chapter of the greatest tale ever